Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this very, very important series presented by Grace and Truth Ministries and entitled Mystery Babylon the Great Exposed at Last. And this series is also known by a subtitle, Whatever Happened to the Faith Once Delivered to the Saints, that we find talked about in the book of Jude. Now, just what is this mystery, Babylon the Great, which the Apostle John speaks of in Revelation 17:5? Friends, do you know what it consists of? Do you know what it looks like? Can you put your finger on it and identify where it's located? Please don't be too sure, friends. And why would I say that? Because it has existed for thousands of years, yet remained unknown to the vast majority of humanity, even though it has permeated the entire earth. And if you're not absolutely certain that you know exactly what it is, then please, friends, please do not leave this series. And why is it vital for you to view this series? Because this mystery, Babylon the Great religious system, has been so cleverly disguised by Satan the devil, who is the master deceiver, right? It's been so cleverly disguised that even the vast majority of church leaders in today's Christian community cannot accurately recognize or identify it. How about that? But the book of Revelation tells us that just before the return of Christ, which is coming sooner than a lot of people think, this mystery system will come out of hiding. And it's going to do what? It's going to take complete dominion over the nations and populations of this earth. And friends, this is why understanding the truth regarding mystery, Babylon the Great, is so vitally important to every Christian. And you know what? It's also vitally important to every human being, whether they're Christians or not. Because this system is going to drastically affect the entire world and its entire population. Make no mistake about that. And in order to fully comprehend what the Apostle John is referring to when he speaks of this mystery system, it is important we first understand that in Bible prophecy, the Church of God, the true Church of God, is often symbolized as a woman, right? But not just any manner of woman, friends, but a pure and undefiled woman, as recorded in Revelation 12, 1 through 6, if you want to look that up. But we see another woman who surfaces in the book of Revelation, don't we? Another woman who is a prostitute church system that seduces humanity with cunning words and warm and fuzzy false doctrines, which leads them away from the true God, his written word, and the faith that was once delivered to the saints. And this very shrewd counterfeit church system actually causes the vast majority of Earth's population to do what? To commit spiritual fornication with this prostitute church. So let's take a look at what Revelation 17, 1 through 6 has to say about this. Quoting now from Revelation 17, 1 through 6. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and talked with John, saying to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters. Now, note that many waters, because we're going to talk about it in a few moments. With whom the kings, the leaders, the presidents of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. The inhabitants. That could be anyone that has not accepted Jesus Christ and obeys him as Lord, King, and Master. Verse 4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornications. So, friends, we see that, unlike the bride of Christ, this woman is obviously not pure and not righteous. You see, she and her harlot daughters are not only guilty of committing spiritual fornication themselves, but what do? They also entice the majority of humankind to do so. It's also very important to note that this prostitute religious system does what? It sits on top of a scarlet beast, showing her, this religious system, to have power and control over the people and leaders of the earth. Listen to this, friends. Listen to this. Revelation 17, verse 15 and 18, quoting, "And he, the angel, said to me," to John, "the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues." Verse 18, "The woman who you saw is the great city, which reigns over the kings, the presidents, the leaders of the earth." It's kind of scary, isn't it, friends? So we find that virtually all of humanity will be so deceived by Satan's system that they will unwittingly, unknowingly worship Satan and the scarlet beast by falling prey to the warm and fuzzy doctrines of this sinister religious system. Now, friends, the Bible is very, very clear on this matter. For God's word expressly tells us that the devil not only has the power to deceive, but what? But has deceived the whole world. And we find that recorded in Revelations 12:9, which says, "And the great dragon," speaking of Satan, "was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which," what? "Deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels, his demonic forces, were cast out with him." Now, friends, some of you who are already believers in Jesus, you may be thinking that this could never, ever happen to you, that there is no way in heaven and earth you could be deceived and be participating in any of this false religious systems, beliefs, or doctrines. Hey, but please just don't be too sure. Don't be overconfident, friends, because in Revelation 18, which is speaking of Babylon, God inspired the Apostle John to write, "And he," one of God's holy angels, "cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, is fallen." And that takes place at Christ's return, doesn't it? This angel goes on to say, "And has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird." Verse 3, "For all nations," get that, "all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the kings," again, the leaders and presidents of the earth, "have committed fornication with her." And what? "And the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies." Goes on to say, this is so important. This is so very important, friends, for you, for me, for everyone. Verse 4, note this, please. "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her," what? What? "My people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues." Now, my dear, dear friends, let's pay close and special attention to verse 4, which again says, "Come out of her," what? "My people." Well, think about this. Just what in the world are God's people doing mixed up with this heinous counterfeit religious system? They obviously had unknowingly gotten tangled up with it and didn't even realize it. So, we've got to ask the question, is it possible for sincere believers to be deceived into embracing this sinister system's beliefs and practices and not even realize it? Well, the Bible seems to say so. Now, the verses we just read, as well as Revelation chapter 2, certainly reveals that it is, for Jesus admonished 2 of his 7 churches for doing so. And we find that recorded in Revelations 2:12, 14 through 15, and 18 through 20, where 2 of God's end-time Jesus-professing churches have unknowingly entangled themselves with the customs and doctrines of Baal and Jezebel. Friends, how is this possible? How can people who sincerely profess Jesus and believe they're following him get caught up in the deception of this counterfeit system? Well, the answer to that vitally important question is going to become more obvious as we expose and trace this Babylon the Great false religious system from its origin up to today, up to its present time, and up to Christ's return. So, let's get going and expose Satan's cleverly concealed counterfeit religious system. Now, friends, as a courtesy to all of our viewers, I must share these final words with you before we begin our presentation. As the book of Revelation states, this system is full of filthiness and abominations to God and the earth. Therefore, it's necessary that we approach this subject head on, not shrivel back, head on, and expose it as it really is. And this means that we must occasionally discuss some very, very unsavory subjects and view some materials and religious objects which would not be appropriate for underage children to view. But in order to expose the full truth, the full evil of this system, we must reveal the origin and history of some of this apostate church's unbiblical doctrines, which have been cunningly concealed and camouflaged by Satan himself, who is the all-time master of deception. Now, we hope that no one is offended by this material. But please remember that God also had to deal with these same heinous issues that took place among the Israelites as well as the Gentile nations. And think about it, friends. God didn't shrink back from addressing these atrocious sinful acts, did he? He met them head on. And if God records them in his own holy word, then do we think we're more righteous than God and feel it inappropriate to address these matters as God does? Now, I think you already know the answer to that question, don't you? So having laid this foundation, we are ready to continue with this study of Mystery Babylon the Great, unveiled at last. And in order to place all the information I promised you on the screen, we are now going to move to our classroom format so everyone can see the information with their very own eyes. We're now in a classroom format to begin the series entitled Babylon the Great, Mother of Harlots and Abominations of the Earth, exposed at last. Now, friends, this is not going to be a quick study of this subject, but rather a journey. And it's vitally important that we go back to the very origin of this system so we can expose it and know where it exists today. Now, we're going to begin our journey and discover this system's origin by going back over 4,000 years, that's 40 centuries, back to the flood and ancient Babylon. And as most people already know, the flood was a divine judgment upon mankind. But why? Friends, it was because the people's hearts had become so corrupt and defiled that their thoughts were only to do evil. And the Bible tells us that in Genesis 6, verse 5. It says, quoting, "The wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." But you know what? God gave humankind a second chance, didn't he? A second chance by preserving the righteous man Noah and his family, a total of only 8 people. Can you imagine only 8 people on this earth? And it's also important for us to understand that Noah was considered by God to be the only righteous man on earth. But, friends, this did not apply to other members of his family. They were only spared because of Noah's righteousness. And that's confirmed in Genesis 6, verse 9, which says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God." Ooh, that's a big statement. How many people can claim that today? And Genesis 7, verse 1 goes on to tell us, "And the Lord said unto Noah, Come you and all your house," or all your family, "into the ark, for you, Noah, have I seen righteous before me in this generation? The Bible also tells us the names of Noah's sons and grandsons, and later even identifies which offspring became the originator of this Babylonian mystery system. So let's take a quick look at their names so we'll know which branch of Noah's family tree rebelled against God. And in Genesis 10, verse 1 and 6, it says, Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem and Ham, and Japheth. And unto them were sons born after the flood. And the sons of Ham, notice we've underlined that and highlighted it, Cush and Mizraim and Phut and Canaan. Now, when the flood was finally over, and Noah had left the ark, the Lord blessed him and his family and instructed them to do what? To go and multiply and replenish the earth. Because remember, again, there was only 8 people on the scene at that point in time. And Genesis 9:1 confirms this for us. And it says, And God blessed Noah and his son, and said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth. And not long after the ark landed, these 8 people began to spread out into the surrounding districts of northern Iran and Syria, as well as eastern Turkey, but with the majority of Noah's descendants eventually settling in the lower regions of what came to be called Mesopotamia. And in the Bible, we find this region referred to as the land of Shinar and Chaldea, and some historians refer to this area as Sumer. So let's take a look at what Nelson's dictionary has to say about this region. Quoting now from Nelson's Bible Dictionary, under Shinar, the land of southern Mesopotamia, later known as Babylonia or Chaldea, through which the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow. Secular historians, friends, usually refer to this area as Sumer. So, when we hear the words Shinar, Babylon, Akkad, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Chaldean, Sumer, or Sumerian, they're all referring to various tribes and languages and or regions located in the greater Mesopotamia area. And it was also in Mesopotamia that the very first cities were built after the flood. And modern archaeologists have confirmed the fact that the first inhabitants of these areas were homogeneous, meaning of the same kind or being alike in both race and in culture. And in addition to that, most reliable reports indicate that it was from here that the Earth's new population, as well as animal husbandry, metallurgy, agriculture, and acidification, began to spread throughout the Earth. It was also in this region that Cush, the son of Ham and grandson of Noah, had a son, which we know today by the name of Nimrod. And this is confirmed in Genesis 10, verses 8 through 9. And Cush begot Nimrod. He, Nimrod, began to be a mighty one. And friends, we have that underlined and highlighted for a reason. And remember this. He began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Now, at first glance, these comments about Nimrod seem to be somewhat flattering, right? But let's dig a little deeper and discover what this verse is really saying about this man. What this verse was inspired by God's Holy Spirit to say about this person that we're supposed to know, but it's been hidden by the different translators. Jamieson Fausset Brown Bible Dictionary, under Nimrod, quoting, the word before, listen friends, listen, the word before, as used in this verse, means opposition. How about that? The Hebrew name Nimrod means let us rebel. Aha. Given by his contemporaries to Nimrod as one who ever had in his mouth such words to stir up his band to rebellion. Nimrod subverted the existing patriarchal order of society by setting up a chieftainship based on personal valor and maintained by aggression. The Adams Clarke Bible commentary also tells us that Nimrod was a tyrant that ruled the people with what? An iron fist. In Genesis 10:9, it describes Nimrod as a mighty hunter, says Clarke's Bible commentary. A mighty hunter before the Lord. He goes on to say, the word hunter, listen friends, as used in this verse is Strong's Concordance number 6718 and refers to prey taken in hunting. Okay, but there's more. Adams Clarke Bible commentary goes on to say the word Said, number 6718, Hebrew word for hunter, is applied in the scriptures to the hunting of men by persecution, oppression, and tyranny. How about that? When have you heard that taught to you? See, we need to know what the Holy Spirit originally inspired and what God was telling us about this man. Now, Nimrod's oppressive kingdom began in Babylon, but it also included several other cities. And we find that in Genesis 10, verses 8 and 10. Again, it says, Cush fathered Nimrod, who was the first powerful man on earth. Verse 10, his kingdom started in Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. But you know what? It was in Babylon that Nimrod started his campaign of rebellion against God, which included the construction of the Tower of Babel. And although the Bible does not specifically say who built the Tower of Babel, most historians do credit Nimrod with its construction, and it was really a tower of rebellion against God. And what do we mean by that? Just stick around and you'll find out. You see, friends, this tower was originally constructed to be a building in defiance of God, sending another flood upon mankind. And it was also to be used as a temple, a place for the people to gather to conduct their new anti-God religious services. Now, let's take a look at what the Jewish historian Josephus has to say about Nimrod and his Tower of Rebellion. But first, for those who may not be familiar with Josephus, we'll let the Encyclopedia Britannica introduce him. It says, quoting, Flavius Josephus, original name Joseph ben Matthias, born, somewhere around 37, 38 AD in Jerusalem and died around AD 100 in Rome. It says he was a Jewish priest, a scholar, and historian who wrote valuable works on the Jewish revolt of 66 through 70 AD and on earlier Jewish history. And here's what Josephus wrote. Listen to this, friends. Listen. Now it was Nimrod who excited them, the people, to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. Josephus goes on to say that he, Nimrod, also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into a constant dependence on his, Nimrod's, power. He also said, get this, friends, get this. It's hard to believe, but it's here in writing. He also said he, Nimrod, would be avenged on God. Avenged on God, can you believe that? If he, God, should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God. What audacity for destroying their forefathers. And Josephus goes on to say, now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. And they built a tower, neither sparing any pains, nor being in any degree negligent about the work. And by reason of the multitude of hands, they had so many people working on it, employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect. But the thickness of it was so great, and it was so strongly built, that thereby its great height seemed, upon the view, to be less than it really was. Now, this is something very important to understand. It goes to show us the heart and the mind and the attitude of Nimrod. It was built, this tower was built of burnt brick, that makes them very hard, cemented together with mortar made of bitumen. Bitumen. Now, friends, that's nothing more than tar. Think about that. They made the mortar of bitumen that it might not be liable to admit water. They were building a waterproof tower. When God saw that they acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners, caused by a tumult among them, by producing in them diverse languages, and causing that through the multitude of those languages, they, the people there, should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion of that language, which they readily understood before. For the Hebrews mean by the word Babel, confusion. How about that? You ever heard that preached or taught? It's also interesting to note that this tower was actually the very first skyscraper built in the history of mankind, and it was completed somewhere around 2239 BC. And when the people came to see the mysteries of Nimrod, well, they lost sight of God, and they refused to fill the earth, but decided instead to build a great political and religious center to unite and bind them together. Obviously, this was another act of defiance and rebellion against God. And how was that? By uniting together in cities and refusing to obey God's command to replenish the earth. We find that in Genesis 11, 1 through 5, which says, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar." See, I'm not making this stuff up. It goes on to say, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." Again, defiance against God. Instead of going and replenishing the entire earth, they settled in this great city. But Nimrod didn't stop just in Babylon, for he went on to build many other cities in order to unite the people in central locations. One of the cities he developed was Nineveh. Did you know that, friends? Which was actually named after Nimrod. Genesis 10, 8 and 11 says, "His," meaning Nimrod's, "kingdom started with Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar." Verse 11, "From that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh." See, we want to go back to the Word of God and confirm everything we're talking about here. And identified by different names, Nimrod was also known by the name Ninus, which refers to the founder of Nineveh. Let's check this out with the Encyclopedia Britannica, which says, "Ninus, king of Assyria, and the eponymous, meaning something named after its creator, founder of the city of Nineveh, which itself is sometimes called Ninus." And the scriptures we just read told us it was Nimrod who built Nineveh, right? So at this point, Nimrod intensified his reign of terror and oppression against the believers in the God of Noah, and essentially wiped out all opposition to his anti-God teachings. And the offering of human sacrifices became common in Nimrod's new religious rituals. Anybody who refused to accept his teachings were tortured, and if they still dissented, then they were put to death. Real nice guy, right? Nimrod was also responsible for reintroducing the worship of the sun and zodiac to humanity after the flood. He was known as a great astronomer and astrologer, tracing the paths of the sun and stars. Some sources even go on to say that Nimrod claimed to have the wisdom of the world, meaning he was in possession of the occult practices that were observed before the flood. He is reported as having said, "I know the truth, and I know the mysteries and the secrets." And the Nelson's Bible Dictionary does confirm that astrology originated in Mesopotamia. So let's see what this Bible Dictionary has to say about Babylon and astrology. It says, quoting, "We do know that the earliest records of astrology have come from Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers where ancient Babylonians flourished." The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia goes on to speak of Babylon's magical and incantation literature. It says, quoting, "The primary sources of our knowledge of this religion are to be found in the distinctively religious texts, such as hymns, prayers, priestly rituals, and liturgies, and in the vast mass of magical and incantation literature." So you see, friends, under Nimrod's rule, a terrible false religion was developed, which included sun and moon worship, astrology, demonic worship, worship of stars associated with their gods, idolatry, human sacrifices, and other mysterious religious ceremonies. But Nimrod was not expanding his kingdom and implementing his mysterious religious system alone, not by a long shot. For he had a very devious partner in his crimes against God. And she's documented as being an exceptionally beautiful yet evil woman. A woman who was power hungry and obsessed with perverted sexual passions. Now, she was heavily involved in the creation of Nimrod's new religious system and was actually the real mastermind behind devising many, if not most, of its beliefs and customs. Both Christian and secular history tells us that this woman was Nimrod's wife, who was just as evil and demonic as himself. And today she's known by the name of Semiramis. Now, a lot of people mispronounce that and call her Semiramis, but it's really pronounced Semiramis. Originally, Semiramis was known by the Sumerian name of Inanna. And as she and her new theology were carried to different nations, Semiramis Inanna also became known as Ishtar, Astarte, Ashtoreth, Aphrodite, Asherah, and Venus. How about that? How about that, friends? So, whenever we run across these names, please remember that their origin is the Babylonian queen/goddess Inanna or Semiramis. And Nelson's Bible Dictionary tells us that Ishtar has been identified with the Phoenician Astarte, the Semitic Asherah, and the Sumerian Inanna. Goes on to say strong similarities also exist between Ishtar and the Egyptian Isis, the Greek Aphrodite, and the Roman Venus. Associated with Ishtar was a young god Tammuz, considered both divine and mortal. And we find something about Tammuz in Ezekiel 8:14. So we're not making these things up. And sooner or later, we're going to the scriptures and start uncovering where this system had infiltrated the whole earth and also the nation of ancient Israel. Some modern encyclopedias and reference materials, they tend or try to characterize Semiramis as only a mythological legend or goddess. However, quite a number of ancient historians share information that gives a much different account. historians like Diodorus Siculus, Justin, and Josephus. And these historians speak of Semiramis as the wife of Nimrod and also a great builder of roads, aqueducts, reservoirs, as well as a shrewd military leader. Now let's see what the Harvard University Press has to say about the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus. It says he was a Greek historian in Sicily around 80-20 BCE. He wrote 40 books of world history called Library of History. He is valuable for details unrecorded elsewhere and as evidence for works now lost. Now from the pen of Diodorus Siculus, in his work entitled Library of History, Book 2, he says of Semiramis and Nimrod, the first to be handed down by tradition to history and memory for us as one who achieved great deeds is Ninus, that's Nimrod, king of the Assyrians, and of him we shall now endeavor to give a detailed account. And he goes on to write, since after the founding of this city, Ninus made a campaign against Bactriana, where he married Semiramis, the most renowned of all women of whom we have any record. It is necessary, first of all, to tell how she rose from a lowly fortune to such fame. The Jewish historian Josephus writes, speaking of Semiramis and her rebuild of Babylon, he says, the great improvements that Nebuchadnezzar made in the building at Babylon in no way contradict those ancient and authentic testimonies that ascribe its first building to Nimrod and its first rebuild to Semiramis. Strabo, who was a well-respected Greek historian and geographer, also speaks of the mighty works of Semiramis. And once again, we're going to call on the Encyclopedia Britannica to introduce this renowned ancient historian to us. It says, Strabo, Greek geographer and historian whose geography is the only extant work covering the whole range of peoples and countries known to both Greeks and Romans during the reign of Augustus. Its numerous quotations from technical literature, moreover, provide a remarkable account of the state of Greek geographical science, as well as the history of the countries it surveys. Now listen to this, what Strabo says. When those who have written histories of the Syrian Empire say that the Medes were overthrown by the Persians and the Syrians by the Medes, they mean by the Syrians no other people than those who built the royal palaces in Babylon and Ninus. And of these Syrians, Ninus, meaning Nimrod, was the man who founded Ninus in Arturia, and his wife Semiramis was a woman who succeeded her husband. He says, those who gained the mastery of Asia, and as for Semiramis, apart from her works at Babylon, many others are also to be seen throughout almost the whole of the continent. I mean the mounds called the mounds of Semiramis, and walls and the constructions of fortifications with aqueducts therein, and of reservoirs for drinking water, and of ladder-like ascents of mountains, and of channels and rivers and lakes, and of roads and bridges. And Justin Marcus Julianus Justinus, a Roman historian, includes Semiramis in his list of first Assyrian monarchs. Let's take a look at this. It says, Ninus, the son of Jupiter Belus. He goes on to say, Semiramis, the wife of Ninus. And addressing Semiramis' uncontrollable lust for sexual perversions, St. Augustine speaks of her incestual relationship with her illegitimate son, who is known by the names Ninus, Tammuz, Ninus, Zames, and Adonis. Now, friends, listen to this quote from the New Advent Catholic Encyclopedia regarding St. Augustine and some comments about Semiramis. He says, quoting, for the son of Ninus, that would have been Tammuz, right, or Ninus, reigned among them after his mother Semiramis, who is said to have been put to death by him for attempting to defile him by incestuously lying with him. How about that? I don't know about you, friends, but Semiramis doesn't sound like a myth to me. But some historians will still go on to want to insist that Semiramis of early ancient Babylon was only a mythological legend. They maintain that another queen named Sumer-Ramat, Assyrian for Semiramis, who was married to King Samshi-Adad and reigned from 811 through 806 BC, was the real historical Semiramis. But there are several problems with this conclusion, friends. First, Sammu-Rammat only reigned for 5 years, and the time period of her reign is not in sync with the timeline nor the reported husband of Semiramis as recorded by both Josephus and Justin. And we just took a look at these two resources a moment ago. In addition to that, not very much is really known about Queen Sumer-Rammat or her achievements. And let's see what the Ancient History Encyclopedia has to say about this. Quoting, Sammu-Rammat, more famously known as Semiramis, was the queen regent of Assyrian Empire, reigned 811 through 806 BCE. This, however, is precisely the problem with Sammu-Rammat's reign. There is very little information about what she did and how she went about doing it, and some scholars refer to her simply as an obscure Assyrian lady of the 8th century BC, of whom we know nothing for certain except that she is named on an inscription as Lady of the Palace. Finally, other women of prominence were in such awe of the works and dominance of Semiramis of ancient Babylon that they assumed her name in honor of her achievements. Author Stephanie Dalley explains this issue in her book, The Mystery of the Hanging Garden of Babylon. In that book she says, quoting, why should more than one queen be called Semiramis in addition to her own name? The name of a very famous example of a historical queen can be identified with the archetype and could be used for latter famous queens as we have seen for Nebuchadnezzar. And friends, some sources even refer to these two women as Semiramis I and Semiramis II. And with that information, friends, we come to the end of part 1 of this series, but there is much more to come in part 2, where we will be exploring many of the beliefs and doctrines and customs that originated with Semiramis, Nimrod, and Tammuz. And you know what? You're going to be amazed, I promise you. Amazed and astonished to learn how these same doctrines and customs have infiltrated and influenced virtually every religious system that has existed over the last 4,250 years. And yes, friends, that includes virtually every religious system in existence today. That's right, because Satan the deceiver has so cleverly disguised the customs and doctrines surrounding Nimrod and Semiramis' mystery religion that it's alive and well and thriving all around us. Yet, friends, it remains totally invisible to most religious leaders and church clergymen. Now, I must tell you that some of the doctrines of Nimrod and Semiramis' religious system may sound like twisted fairy tales or even warped myths. But please don't let that discourage you from continuing with this very, very important study, because I'm going to show you in the scriptures where Semiramis' perverted doctrines caused God to become angry with the ancient Israelites. We'll also see how her mystery system was also the foundation for all the Gentile nations' false and adulterous religions. So, please stay with me for part 2 of this extremely, extremely important series as we explore some of the shocking doctrines that Semiramis is credited with devising in order to preserve her power, her religious leadership, and raise her to the status of the Queen of Babylon and the Queen of Heaven. Just click on the end card and bingo, it will take you to the next part. And just so you will know, we feel that there will be probably 4 or 5 parts to this series. And why don't you just go ahead and subscribe to this channel, and you'll be automatically notified when the next part is online. Now, friends, thanks for watching. And please tell your church members and your friends about this series. I'll see you in part 2.